My name is Caleb, and this happened when I was 19. I've told the story maybe twice in my life because I still don't fully understand what I saw. But a few people I did tell actually believe me, so I've decided to share it on your channel as well. Back then I worked part-time for a small landscaping company that took jobs all over Pennsylvania. One week we had a contract for a private property near the edge of the Allegheny National Forest. The owner was an older guy who wanted a section of his land cleared of debris and dead trees. He mentioned he was selling the property and wanted it to look nice for the buyers. It was in October of 2008, near the tail end of fall. The mornings were getting icy, but by mid-afternoon it was just cold enough to need a jacket. On this particular day, my boss had me working alone at the farthest edge of the property. There was a creek running through the woods there, and my job was to clean up the area around it, hauling out broken branches, raking leaves, and cutting back overgrowth. The place was quiet. There were no birds, no squirrels, just the sound of the creek rolling over the rocks. I didn't think much of it at first. It was early, and animals tend to stay out of sight when people are around. But the longer I worked, the heavier the silence felt. It was just quiet. It was completely dead. Around noon, I took a break to eat lunch. I was sitting on a fallen log by the creek, unwrapping my sandwich, when I noticed something odd across the creek. About 30 feet away was a patch of mud with what looked to be paw prints in it. They were way bigger than any canine print I've seen before, and they were spaced out like whatever made them had been walking on two legs. I stood up, trying to get a better look. That's when I noticed the smell. It was this awful, rotten stench. It was the exact smell when something is dead nearby. I just assumed it was most likely a deer carcass or maybe some garbage dumped in the woods, but it was strong enough to make me not finish my meal. As I started looking around, I heard a splash in the creek. Something had stepped into the water upstream, just around the bend, out of my sight. I waited, thinking it might be a deer or possibly a bear, but what I saw next wasn't either of those. A figure stepped into view, walking through the creek like it owned the place. This thing was tall, I'm guessing probably somewhere around 8 or 8.5 feet. Its shoulders was as wide as a car hood, and its arms were long and muscular, and they swung slightly as it moved. Its head is what stopped me cold. It looked just like a wolf or similar to a German Shepherd. But once I saw its eyes, I could tell they were not right. Its eyes were glowing during the day. They were a very hypnotizing amber color that stood out even with the sun shining. I ducked down behind a fallen log, hoping it wouldn't notice me, but all of a sudden it stopped walking, turned its head, and it was staring directly at me. The way that it was looking at me didn't feel like an animal sizing up a threat. It felt like this thing was highly intelligent, like it knew exactly what I was thinking. Then it smiled at me. I swear on everything it curled its lips back just enough to show its teeth, and the look on its face was almost amusement. That's when I noticed something else. It wasn't just looking at me, it was in my head. I don't know how to explain it, but I felt this pressure, like it was trying to push thoughts into my mind. I began to hear whispers, not out loud, but inside my head, like a dozen voices talking all at once. I couldn't make out one single word, but it was very overwhelming. It was like static buzzing through my entire skull. It was the weirdest feeling I've ever felt, and I can barely describe it. I started stumbling backwards, and that's when it let out this rumbling growl. It wasn't audibly loud, but I could feel it in my chest and stomach. It's like the growl was sending vibrational waves through the air. My legs decided it was time to work, and I turned and headed straight for my truck. I could hear it following me, but it didn't sound like it was running, it was walking. I could hear slow steps crunching in the leaves and snapping twigs. I think it was just playing with me, letting me know in a way that it could catch me if it wanted to. When I got to the truck, I just threw myself inside and locked all the doors. I looked out the driver's side window, and there it was. It was standing at the edge of the tree line. It just tilted its head like it was curious, and then it did something that I'll never forget as long as I live. Remember, I said that it seemed intelligent. It raised one hand, or whatever you would call that appendage, and it waved. Not a random movement, not a twitch, but an actual wave. Then it slowly turned and walked into the woods, just like nothing had ever happened. Like our interaction we just had was the most normal thing in the world. I just sat there in the truck for what felt like forever, my brain spinning out of control, trying to figure out what had just happened and what I should do. Eventually, my boss radioed me, asking me why I hadn't finished my section yet. I told him I wasn't feeling well and drove back to the main property. When I told him about the tracks and the smell, he just played it off and said it was probably a black bear. I didn't even try to argue. I knew where this conversation was headed, and I wasn't in the right frame of mind to deal with it. That night, I had a dream about the creature. It was standing outside my bedroom window. I could see those glowing amber eyes just staring inside. I woke up soaked in sweat, but when I checked outside, there was nothing out there, which was a huge relief. I expected to see that thing standing in my yard. For weeks I felt like I was being watched. I would catch movement out of the corner of my eye, or I would hear footsteps outside of my house, but I never saw anything. Eventually it all just stopped, but even today I still have that feeling that it let me go on purpose, just to torment me even more. I don't know what these dogmen are, or why this one didn't kill me. They usually don't kill anyone for the most part, or from all the stories I've heard anyway. I truly believe these things have a sole purpose, and that sole purpose, in my opinion, is to absolutely terrify every human that they cross paths with. But they are not just a physical animal, also an opinion. That thing was something else, something that I hope I never see again. Thanks for replying to my email, and I'm excited to hear your narration of my story. Thank you, Reels. Caleb. Tonight's second encounter. I appreciate you contacting me back. For anyone listening, my name is Daniel. And I'm typing all this out because I've never been able to explain what happened to me. I'm not a storyteller or a writer. I'm a forester. Or I used to be back then. This account is pulled straight from my notes, scribbled down in a logbook I kept for work. It was early May 2002. My job was to survey a section of Pisgah National Forest for storm damage. The forest had taken a beating that spring. Tons of trails were flooded, trees were down everywhere, footbridges were all washed out. My assignment was to hike through a more remote stretch of the forest and mark areas that needed repairs. The section I was assigned to wasn't popular with hikers. It was really rugged, most of the time poorly maintained, and crisscrossed by overgrown game trails. I started working my way up an old fire road, checking off storm damage as I went. By noon, I was about 5 miles in and hadn't seen another soul. That's when I found a weird marker. I found a stick. It was sharpened at one end and stuck upright in the ground. Tied to it was a bundle of feathers and what looked like strips of animal hide, and they were stained a dark rusty color. It wasn't anything official, just some strange homemade thing stuck in the middle of the trail. I noted it in my logbook and kept going, but it wasn't the only one. Over the next mile, I found 5 more similar markers, each one different in their own way. Some more simple. A stick with a rock balanced on one end. Others were more elaborate, like a lattice of twigs tied together with something that looked like it had been sinew. I'm not ashamed to admit it, I started to feel a bit uneasy. This wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect from campers or hikers. They felt purposeful, like they were left there to leave a message to anyone who finds them, which unfortunately was me. Later on, around 2 in the afternoon, I made it to a clearing near a ridge. There was a massive oak tree in the center. Its branches were stretching out like wooden arms. Hanging from the lower limbs were more of these markers. They were just swinging in the breeze. For some reason, that made it even more creepy. It made me think of that stupid movie, The Blair Witch Project. That was definitely not what I needed to be thinking about when I'm already freaked out. So I quickly pushed that aside and scrubbed it from my mind. I will say it's not easy to scare me. I've been doing that job for quite a while and was used to seeing a lot of strange things. But something about that place just set my teeth on edge. The air was heavier there. It was a pressure like high humidity levels before a thunderstorm. There was no bad weather in the forecast, and the sky was as blue as could be. I made a quick note in my logbook and moved on, wanting to get away from that tree with those weird things hanging in it as fast as I could. I hadn't made it more than a half a mile when I started hearing these low, howling noises that seemed to be vibrating through the entire forest. I put my hand on a tree to steady myself so I could listen, and I could feel the howl vibrating inside the tree. It wasn't a wolf or a coyote. I know full well what those sound like. This was deeper, almost like it was layered with something else, coming from a very large animal with a large set of lungs. And from my experience, this was a sound that did not belong in the forest. I began scanning all around me, but I never saw anything. Just trees, underbrush, and no movement whatsoever. I noticed it was oppressively silent after that I'd stopped. I thought I heard a sound about 50 yards away out in front of me in the woods. I strained my eyes and was almost positive that I saw a shape moving. It was zigzagging from tree to tree, being very stealthy and predatory in nature. It wasn't close enough for me to see any details, but it was big. It appeared to be very easily taller than I was. And it had a lean, muscular, athletic frame. The way this animal moved its body just wasn't normal at all. Its movements were very fluid, very smooth, almost like it wasn't restricted by the same joints and bones as every other living creature. I dropped down on one knee and crouched as low as possible, and stayed perfectly still, watching it weave through the trees. It stopped at one of those markers and crouched. It looked like it was examining it. Without warning or reasoning, it turned its head, and I swear it looked straight at me. There is no way any animal would have known where I was because I was hidden pretty well in the trees. Even at that distance, I could see this animal's eyes. They were huge. They weren't glowing or anything dramatic like other encounters I've heard. They were really pale, almost gray, and completely emotionless. And that's what scared me the most. There was no curiosity, no aggression, not even recognition. There was just nothing there. Eventually it stood up and walked off. It didn't make a sound. It seemed to just melt into the forest like a ghost. I waited another 5 minutes before I started moving again. heading back towards the fire road. I kept my pace pretty steady, but my senses were definitely on overdrive. Every little crunch of leaves, every sound I heard, I instantly felt like that thing was right behind me. About an hour later, I made it back to the fire road, but something felt off. The markers I'd seen earlier were just gone, every single one of them. The trail looked untouched, like no one had been there in years. When I got back to the ranger station, I told my supervisor about the markers and the thing that I saw. He gave me a long, hard look and said, "It's probably just a bunch of kids messing around, trying to scare you." Then he quickly changed the subject and told me to file my report, but he asked me to leave the sighting of the creature out of the report. Of course, I did what he said, but I just couldn't let it go, not after seeing that and knowing that it was real. Apparently he knew about these things, or he wouldn't have acted in such a strange manner. About a week later, I went back to that section of the forest with a friend who worked with me. We found nothing. The markers were not there. I couldn't even find that clearing, and that oak tree with the weird objects, I just couldn't locate it again either. It was like it had been swallowed by the forest, and I could not for the life of me, and I still don't understand how that happened. I still have my logbook from that day. Sometimes I just sit and look at it, trying to piece any of these pieces together. I've heard a lot of stories about strange things in the world. Cryptids, skinwalkers, Dogman, spirits, Sasquatch. But I'm not sure how much of it I truly believe. I do believe that something was out there that day. It wasn't human nor animal. It fits the description of a dogman, but I cannot be certain. I did make out pointy ears and a long canine snout. But as far as other features go, like a tail or anything else, I really didn't see it well enough to tell you any details like that. I'm the type of person, I don't want to tell anyone anything that is wrong or untrue. So if I'm not sure or I don't know, I will tell you so. And aside from the pointed ears and the long snout, I have no idea what I was looking at that day. But whatever it was, it clearly did not want me there. That's the feeling that I got. No worries, because I'll never go back to find out why. Again, I'm not a storyteller or an author. I tried my best to type this out to fit your narration form. If you need to change anything, feel free to do so. I love your channel and I'm excited to see it grow. Definitely one of my top 3 favorite Dogman Encounter channels. Keep it up. You're almost to 10K subscribers. Talk to you soon. Daniel. Tonight's 3rd encounter. Charleston Naval Shipyard, South Carolina, 1998. People always think shipyards are loud places. Clanging metal, machinery, voices that echo through the docks. And they are during the day, but at night they're dead, quiet, not a sound to be heard. I know because I worked security there for 4 years, doing night shifts when no one else wanted to. Of course it was boring, mostly just walking the perimeter, checking locks, making sure nobody was sneaking in to steal tools or scrap metal. The weirdest thing I dealt with was a raccoon that got loose into the break room one time. That was before the night I encountered a dogman. It was late October or early November 1998, and I was pulling a double shift. My partner had called in sick, so it was just me and the floodlights keeping watch over the south end of the shipyard. The place was huge, an endless maze of dry docks, warehouses, and stacked shipping containers. Even with the lights, there were plenty of dark corners where anything or anyone could hide. Between 2:30 and 3 a.m., I was walking my usual route along the fence line near the water. The tide was high, and the smell of salt and diesel hung in the air. That's when I noticed something else. One of the motion-activated lights near the far end of the yard had flicked on. I couldn't see much from where I was, just the glow spilling out from behind a stack of containers. Normally, I'd chalk it up to the wind or maybe just a stray animal. But something about it made me pause. I radioed the main office to let them know what was happening, and I was checking it out. Then I started heading in that direction. As I made my way closer, I noticed the smell. It was like wet fur and something sour like spoiled meat that's been left in the heat. I've worked around plenty of dead fish and rotting garbage, but this smell was horrendous. It was just, let's just say, a very unique stench. When I rounded the corner, I literally stopped in my tracks, completely frozen. There was something crouched in the shadow of the containers just outside the reach of the lights. At first, it looked like a really big dog, possibly a stray that had wandered in through a gap in the fence. But as my eyes slowly started to adjust to the darkness, I quickly realized this thing was entirely too large to be a dog. It had a forward, hunched position. Its posture was very strange. It had long, nasty-looking limbs and a thick, matted coat of black fur. Its head was wolf-like with pointed ears that stood up off the top of its head. They had small tufts of hair on them. It wasn't fully on 4 legs. Its back legs were bent like a man squatting, and its front limbs had what looked to be hands, and I could see it was gripping something. I couldn't see what it was holding at first, but then it shifted a little and the light caught it. It was holding a dead raccoon. I could tell very easily its neck was snapped. Its head was a complete 180 in the wrong direction. Its body fully limp. The thing was eating it. I watched it tear into the meat with long yellow teeth. This was definitely a canine-looking animal or creature. I could clearly see its canine teeth. I must have gasped or made some sort of noise because it stopped and turned its head and looked right at me. I have to say, and I've heard it many times before, the eyes on this creature easily the most memorable detail. They were a deep yellow, I would say almost golden, and reflective like an animal's. But there was something calculating about them. They almost had their appearance of human eyes. For a second, I didn't move, and neither did it. I was too scared to even reach for my flashlight. Suddenly, it began to stand up onto 2 legs. It didn't happen all at once like a dog standing on its hind legs. This thing uncoiled. Its limbs were stretching unnaturally until it was completely towering over me. This thing had to be in the neighborhood of 9 to 10 feet tall. The raccoon dropped from its hand, and it stepped forward into the light. This thing had a thick coat of dark fur, and it looked like its skin had been stretched over its skeleton. The skin under the fur was a gray color. This thing was almost sick-looking. It didn't look healthy at all. Almost like it was extremely malnourished. Its face was definitely elongated like a wolf, but the angles were just too sharp. It looked like this thing, whatever it was or wherever it came from, was trying its best to act human, but it just hadn't quite figured it out. I couldn't tell you how long I stood there. I've never heard it making any growling sounds or any other sounds for that matter. It was silent while it just stood there looking down at me. In my mind, I could hear a voice that wasn't my own. It was clearly, "I dare you to move. I dare you to run. I dare you." The creature opened its mouth, not to attack or be aggressive, almost like it was trying to speak. The sounds it made were broken, like a mix of growls and syllables that just didn't belong together. But the sound it made my chest tighten, like my body was rejecting it on instinct. I took a step back, and it mimicked my movements by stepping forward. That's when I realized that it wasn't just watching me. It was testing me, seeing how I would react to its behaviors and movements. It was trying to scare me, that was clear, and it was enjoying every second of it. I can't tell you what came over me, but I raised my flashlight and turned it on, shining it directly into its eyes. The second the beam hit its face, it snarled, making a weird sound that shook me to my core. With an instant blast of very fast movement, it took off. I still don't understand how anything can move that fast, especially something that big. I ran back to the main office and unlocked the door. I could barely hold on to my radio. I told the guy on the other end I'd seen a wild animal in the yard and needed backup. By the time another guard showed up, there was no sign of it. Only the dead raccoon was left. No indications that it had even been there. The next morning, I quit. I told my supervisor I couldn't do the night shifts anymore. I never gave him the real reason, I just said the hours were not working out for me. Obviously, I still think about it. How could you not? The one thing from this entire encounter that has always made me question everything. That Dogman could have killed me if it wanted to, but it didn't. It let me go. My question is why? Why do they let most people survive the encounter and others disappear, never to be seen again? It just doesn't add up at all, in my opinion. Maybe one day we'll find out. I sure hope so. Thanks for accepting my story. Looking forward to future conversations. Anonymous. First off, I want to thank these 3 individuals for trusting me and sending me these encounters. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel, Caleb, and Anonymous. You guys are awesome individuals. It takes a lot of guts and bravery to come forward with your encounter and tell it to thousands of people. I really hope that by sharing your tragic events that it somehow eases your mind and lightens your burdens. And Anonymous, as for your question, I've often wondered that very same thing. Why does someone live and others are gone, never to be seen? How do they choose who to take and who to let live? Is it even Dogmen taking these people? Or is it some other cryptid and Dogmen are blamed? Like you said, maybe one day we will all get the answers to these questions. But until then, we can carry on with our conversations. We can share our stories as we've been doing here. Again, I appreciate you getting in contact with me. Thank you. Thank you, my friends. As for you legends that are listening right now, I couldn't appreciate you any more. I truly thank you all for your kind words and all of your comments and your support. As the channel continues to grow, I am more than humbled. It's just very surreal that so many people enjoy listening to me narrate these encounters. You guys are all amazing, and I truly think of you as my family. I always try to read every single comment and reply if I can. I myself have personally never came across another YouTuber that does that. That should tell you guys all you need to know. When they don't care enough to even answer their subscribers, they're probably in it for the money. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong, and honestly, I hope that I am. Anyway, that's going to do it for tonight's upload. I hope you guys had an amazing weekend. It's time to get back to the grind of the steady work week. As I close out this video, I pray that each one of you is blessed beyond measure, that you and your loved ones are safe and healthy. Please be sure and smash the like button before you go. And if you're enjoying my content, I urge you to subscribe. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you'll be notified of any future uploads. Until next time, my friends, watch over your loved ones. Keep your head on a swivel. And as always, good night.